Hi, today we have somewhat of a long episode because I had a couple of time lapses and just the first two would be a bit too short because that would be 7 minutes, but now there's another one and that made the total video almost 16 minutes I think, which is a little bit too long. It's a little bit on the long side, but it's not terrible, so I guess I can just do that. But I am almost running out of time because I have to go into Rotterdam in a bit. So I only have this one opportunity, this one moment to seize everything I've ever wanted, so I have to do it right now. So basically what we're going to do today is work on the main street, just a bit more. I don't exactly know how many episodes I'll still be doing this. Let me check my videos. There's one time lapse over here. There's another one, there's 3, 4, 5, oh my, there's still 6 time lapses of the main street, but a couple ones of those are just about an hour long. I think the average is actually an hour. So that'll translate into roughly 3 episodes, and then the main street should be done. At least the main street should be done in terms of buildings. I still need to add a square to it, because after I do the main street, I want to add the square that's after the main street. So the Disneyland-ish square, which is going to have either that fountain or a chair swing or whatever I feel like. But I also want to have some small entrance square because, you know, I do want to get something similar to Disneyland. Plus, I've already reserved some land space in front of these entrance, so I might as well actually use that. One thing that I'm actually not too certain about is whether this sandbox is actually going to be large enough for this park. So either I'll have to really watch out with how big I'm going to make this park, or I have to move everything into a custom scenario, which wouldn't be a problem either. And I might actually do that anyway, because then you can control the weather and stuff like that, but I'm really not used to using scenarios. And in general, the sandbox should be big enough for a park. So I'll try the sandbox, but if it really doesn't work, I have to migrate it to a custom scenario, but I'll have to do that in a pretty early stage, because at this stage, everything in the park so far is actually kind of fake. It is nothing at all. There are no paths yet, no attractions. It is all just custom scenery that all this stuff is based on. I should probably talk a bit about the buildings, but honestly, these aren't really too interesting. These were just a couple of filler buildings that I wanted to get in there because I wanted to get that square feeling, like you're in the middle of a city, or a main street rather in this case. But I couldn't really fill up the entire square with amazing, beautiful buildings, even if I could. I probably would have gotten bored or just don't care. So yeah, I'm sorry, but there's gonna be some filler downtime in the square as well. But this building, I still kind of feel like it fits in there. It's a bit of a Dutch building, and I think it's the only real Dutch/Flemish. I almost feel like it's more Flemish because it has those grey stones, which you kind of see more often in Antwerp than in some Dutch cities, but it's the same similar kind of style. Anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. And yes, I did just say that. If I'm going to do a theme which is going to be based around this area, I'm just going to call Holland and Flanders the same area. So I'm sorry to all the people who are offended, but in a cultural way, when those buildings were built, they were pretty much the same country. So yeah, that's just something that I figured I would actually think about and take into consideration when I was building the buildings. This building is a bit of a mirror image of the building on the other side, except it has very different details. You can actually see me looking at the building on the other side every now and then in the time-lapse to see what kind of things I did, because it does have many similarities, especially in the pillars and the types of walls that I used. Though the details are always different, because that is something to always take into account, that even though some buildings in the main street may end up similar because of similar custom scenery used, or just because you're running out of things that go well with the themes but don't really have too much of a contrast with the rest of the building in the main street, you should always realize that you don't want to have too many of the same details on all the buildings, because that would mean that the buildings just look too similar on the main street as a whole. So that is also something that I wanted to keep remembering when I was building these buildings, and there are a couple of objects with which I kind of failed. As you can see, there are many buildings which have that standard main street roof, be it with either the dark texture or the light texture, and one of the reasons for that is I tried a couple of other roofs. I tried the roofs from Station Gym's Spooky Set. I always call it Spooky Set, but isn't the name like Ghost Cabin, that's the name. And RCT3 Anim's Birthday Manor, which is also made by Station Gym Jr. But those roofs just didn't really have the same Main Street ring to it that the Main Street roofs had, so I had to kind of overuse those roofs. And the balconies. Balconies are still a bit of a problem. because every single balcony so far that I've placed is from Main Street Set 1, because that's the only good balcony that I think really fits with the theme. And to be very honest, there aren't really too many balconies in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 that have that type of fence and decoration on it. So that's a bit of an issue. I might actually want to make my own, but that's only if I actually feel like it. I'm probably going to be too lazy to do that, anyway. So, but that might come at some point in time. Actually, I think the next episode is going to be the first episode in which I'll do some custom scenery. I don't think I've really talked about this too much, but one of the things that I'm planning for this park is to, every time I run into some kind of object that I need, but doesn't exist in the game, or it doesn't have the right texture, or it just doesn't nearly have the right shape or size or whatever, I'm just going to make my own custom scenery. This is something that I've done before, but it's something that I was a bit hesitant to do in my Let's Play because it is something that you can't really film, and it is still part of the park creating process. But I'm not going to film it, but I will actually try to make as much custom scenery and not let me be too limited by the limited amount of custom scenery that's available so far. And at the end, when I do have a set, hopefully, that's just made for this park, that actually has some usable pieces in it, I'll release that as well. Though it might become a very, very jumbled mess. And this is something that some people may have actually seen when they've downloaded my style themed folder. I haven't really said sorry about this because I should definitely excuse myself here. Because my style themed folder is just a bit of a mess when it comes to some things, because usually what I do when I need a custom scenery piece and it doesn't exist yet in the game, I just whip it up in Google SketchUp and import it, but I never ever actually do the effort to get the right icons and right names. So there's a couple of items with really weird names and random icons just scattered throughout my style theme, and thus also in my walls and object folders. And that might also be a bit weird. And to be very honest, I still need to get to doing the icons for various sets. I still keep promising everybody that I'll release some of my custom scenery sets, but they're still all just in beta and still just downloadable from my style themed folder. So one thing that I am planning on doing is getting the best pieces from all my random custom scenery sets, that mostly the pieces that I've been using the most, and just put them in one set and call that like Silverette's random things. So all the pieces that I've been using for all these times can actually be used by other people as well. That seems like a nice thing. Regardless, I should do that because I always complain about other people not releasing their sets, which is very annoying. I am very much against people not releasing things that, you know, could be public. That is, unless it is really made specifically for your projects and I just fucking drop my phone. But yeah, some people just, I don't know, there's just these very underused sets that aren't officially released and just kind of go around hand to hand, hand from hand, and I don't know, it's not something that I'm a huge fan of. But yeah, I feel like I am not very entitled to complain about that when I only have some betas of my sets in my style themed folders, and I just kind of keep them, yeah, not very officially out there yet either. Which is mostly due to the fact actually that I'm very hesitant to add icons to it, because that's pretty much one of the only things that I still need to do on many of my sets is add icons to it. But that's just the most boring thing ever. But that's also another thing that I really can't complain about, because I always complain about people who don't put icons in their custom scenery sets, and they have hundreds of pieces, but none of the pieces actually have a picture, so it's really hard to find what you're looking for. And I always like to complain about that, but I'm probably not entitled to do that either, because I rarely have any icons in my sets either. So I really have to get to that. In any case, this building. This building is that mirror image building that I've talked about in the earlier episode, that would kind of resemble the building on the other side, but not exactly. As you can tell, there's a different roof, some different colors, some different windows and different details, but as a whole the building is quite similar, mainly due to the fact that it has the same shape and size and all. And it also should function as a restaurant. Don't have any interiors yet, and I've actually spoken to people about interior stuff, because that's something that this Main Street misses. It's got a couple of buildings that are assigned as shops, and a couple of buildings that are restaurants. That would be these two buildings. And in the future, some building will be assigned to toilets, but there's just this thing that none of the buildings are actually functional when you go into them. I don't know if I'm actually going to do that or not, because in general, I'm just much more interested in exteriors, and I really suck at interiors too. So I don't know if I'll really be getting to that. but I do want to make this main street at least look as lively as I can, so after I finish the main street, sometime after I finish the main street that is, I do want to add some very small details, and by that I don't mean really building details, but just details that make it look more lively, like the real main street has some flags and lights hanging around, and you have some signs in the building, stuff like that. That's really something that, it doesn't make the buildings look more good, but it does make the main street as a whole look a lot more like it's actually in a theme park and actually like a nice place to be, and it helps the atmosphere, I guess. But yeah, that's also something for another time, and perhaps even a time after I finish the main street and the squares and stuff, because I do notice that the more I'm working on this, the more some people are like, you know, you should actually get to some roller coasters as well. And the more I also start thinking about roller coasters, because there are a couple of ideas that I really want to try out, and I've read it in the comments. A B&M dive machine and a B&M invert are definitely two things that I want to think about. They've both got their pros and cons, obviously. A dive machine is really cool because I really like Griffin, and I like the way that it's themed around the pathways. I think what you can do with dive machines and the paths around them is really nice. But also the Efteling has done some really amazing things with Baron 1898. And that's the way you pronounce it in Dutch, the language. Yeah, I don't really know if I want to do that, because there's also this thing about B&M inverts that I really like, because they're so good when it comes to theming. You can do loads of scenery interaction and path interaction with B&M inverts. And the layouts, you can also do a lot with layouts. You can keep them small, somewhat smaller than some of the other B&Ms. They don't stand out as much, but they are much more subtle when it comes to the scenery and the way they look. So that's also a nice thing, but I have been kind of overusing B&M inverts because they're one of my favorite coaster types, because of the aforementioned scenery reasons. So yeah, that's also one reason to consider a dive machine over an invert. I will probably do either one because I'm not sure whether I want to have two B&Ms, but it might just happen. If I really feel like adding two B&Ms, then it might just happen. I mean, after all, Busch Gardens, and by that I mean Williamsburg, actually has a B&M invert and a dive machine as well, and I do like their theming around both rides, though I would like to make it a bit more heavily themed. If I ever do an invert, it is not going to be an invert like Alpengeist, but more something like Black Mamba or something like Nemesis, which are both amazing coasters. Because if I do coasters, I do want to have some intense rides in here, but I want every single ride, even the roller coasters, to at least be very confined within the space of theming, because I almost feel like a theme park is a bit of an immersion experience, almost a bit like a TV show is an immersion, whereas you're in this different kind of land, you're in this fantasy land where everything is great and the rest of the world is shitty, and you know, you don't want to get taken away from that. And with some parks like Europa Park, it is all beautiful and you're in all types of countries in the world, and then you go on Silver Star and you're on a parking lot. That's the problem that I have with enormous coasters like B&M inverts, like big B&M inverts, B&M hypers and Intamin megas, stuff like that, that it is so big that you can't properly theme the entire thing, and I guess it takes away from the immersion a bit. That is not to say that they're bad per se, but they would be bad in a park that strives for something that Disney tries to strive for, or the Efteling, or whatever park has heavy theming. I guess Phantasialand is also a very good example, because it does take away from the immersion, and that immersion is something that I do want to keep. If you're in this park, you're going to be in this park and you're not going to see anything that takes you away from the park. And if you have a B&M hyper, then you're 10,000 kilometers up in the air and you can see New York in the distance, and it's just something that I don't know if I really want to have that in this park. But yeah, that's just one reason why I'm trying not to consider those things. When it comes to other roller coasters, I've gotten some pretty good suggestions as well. I definitely want to try a log flume, and if I do, I want to try something like Choppas. I don't know if that's the right way of pronouncing it, but anyway, there's really awesome log flume in Phantasialand, which has amazing theming. It is very heavily themed. It's got 3 drops and it also goes backwards, and it has an airtime hill. An airtime hill log flume is something I want to try. Or I could also do some log flume that actually has a curved track like a Yokohama Cosmo World. But yeah, I'll look at that at some point. Basically, the rides are going to be Disney-ish, but on steroids, I guess. That's a nice way to put it. But I also want to have some cool kiddie rides, because I like kiddie rides. One thing, though, if I do something else than B&M coasters or a mine train, because I definitely want to have a mine train. Yes, definitely like big Grizzly Mountain runaway trains, mine train that is, in Hong Kong's Disneyland, because that is just my favorite coaster ever, and I've always wanted to do some mine train like that. But if I do a coaster that's not a mine train or a B&M coaster, I am kind of hesitant to build them already, because as you may or may not know, the PEP team, who are known for the Europa Pack 1 and 2, are working on new CTs, and these new CTs would be a extension to the existing in-game tracks. So they've got a CT for the Intimate track. I don't know which track that was, but anyway, they added new elements like diagonal looping and very smooth curves and stuff like that. And they also added new elements to the in-game track 11 track, which would be the Schwarzkopf-ish track, but I think it's Premiere. Yeah, it's Premiere. But I kind of want to wait for that, because I'd feel kind of bad if I already added coasters of those tracks and then suddenly these CTs came out, and I could have been making much better roller coasters. So if I do the roller coasters, I want to do the B&Ms and the mine train first. So the other stuff is going to have to wait. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.